Hi all. Many thanks for your great feedback on a previous John Pigott game. John is currently the highest rated player in my local chess club, Barnet Chess Club. So he's about 229 ECF. He's got 2 IM norms. Okay, but I asked him for any other great games, and he mentioned actually he had a very fond memory against Peter Wells in the British Chess Championship of 1981. So this was played at Morecambe. I think that year, according to Wiki, Paul Littlewood had won it. The next year was played actually at Torquay. Well, I played a couple of years back, and that was won by Tony Miles. But okay, in 1981, here was black against Peter Wells, and Peter played d4, and we had a Nimzo Indian. So Nimzo Indian, c4, e6, and now we have knight c3, bishop b4, and now the kind of Rubinstein move, e3, very popular, very solid. And now we see b6. So black with b6, John is aiming to get control of that e4 square. So it seems a very logical move, all to do with Nimzo Indian's strategy. But now we see a slightly unusual reply here, knight Ge2. So white is preserving cheekily, the bishop pair without any structural damage, if he can recapture with that knight on e2. So it seems like a good idea in principle, but the downside is it's blocking in the bishop, which could lead to a bit of time loss to castle sort of naturally. Or if white's not going to castle naturally, you might want to use the h pawn, believe it or not, to just make use of that rook on h1. So there's some controversy around knight Ge2. But one immediate tactical effect is also c4 slightly interrupted from being protected, and it's this aspect which actually is pounced on by John with his next move, which is bishop a6. So bishop a6. Well, white wants to encourage this capture on c3 to be able to not only take and preserve the structure, but also protect that c4 square, protect that c4 square with the bishop. So this next move, a3. But now black accepts a bit of a time loss, and maybe a bit of provocation on the queen side, as if saying, I don't even mind, you playing b4 next. He plays actually bishop e7, so he keeps his bishop pair, but the damage has been slightly done by causing this interruption to natural development, this knight Ge2. Instead of the knight going here and the bishop there, we've got an unnatural kind of placement for that knight. Okay, but it goes to f4, but it still seems a bit awkward on f4, because potentially black, might have strikes in the centre with tempo. That's one aspect. But also, on f3, it's got more of a grip on that e5 square from f3, and also protecting d4. But anyway, actually, black decides, John decides not to go for d6 or e5 later. He commits actually a pawn on the light square, because he's got a more dynamic aspect, more to do with the position, to do with this bishop still being on f1, and this pressure now on that c4 pawn again, to try and interrupt white from castling. Now white took up the challenge, saying, I don't need to castle, I can use this rook on h1. So actually he plays c takes d, allowing his castling rights to be forfeited. So bishop takes f1, king takes f1. Okay, so we're reaching a very interesting dynamic imbalanced position from the opening after e takes d5. How do we assess this position? Well, as I say, and in one of my recent games, if white isn't able to castle naturally, sometimes he can make use of that rook on h1, with getting these pawns forward. Okay, but all these things have little, downsides and tactical side effects, which sometimes can be exploited, like, tactical vacuums. If you start moving pawns forward, weaknesses are created. But here, white is also tempted, because he has a lot of pressure on that d5 pawn. So how to also, not only get an attack potentially against the castled king on this side, but maybe, the temptation to try and play for g4, g5, to try and undermine black's grip on that d5 square, because black really doesn't want to play a move like c6 either. That would just give white extra time, maybe queen f3s, and it would seem to be an increasingly passive position for black. Okay, so black's faced with potentially, twofold attack, not just against his king when he castles, but also indirectly against d5. So this next move, g4, maybe a lot of us will be quite concerned about these two aspects, especially d5 immediately. But John has done some research in this position, and he said, well, it's coming up on move 13. I'll start mentioning some of his comments which he emailed me. Okay, so after castles, he's inviting g5, which undermines that d5 pawn. So he's getting in his knight e4. So the knight's kind of aggressively placed here, yes. But the obvious thing about this position is d5 is loose. And in return, black can take on g5, but surely that opens up the g-file for the black king to be a bit unsafe. So really white's tempted to take on g5 anyway, and not play any other move here. Okay, so he plays actually knight c takes d5, and John played bishop takes g5. Now here I'll start reading some notes actually. Bishop takes g5. Okay, c takes d5. So John had said, I played this opening once before against Andrew Law, who played 12, actually, on the move 12 here, Andrew Law had actually played h4, and in fact, we looked at knight c takes d knight c takes d afterwards, and concluded that black could play, had to play knight takes g5 when he was okay. But we both didn't quite believe this. Okay, so I don't think either of us believed this, and Andrew really got the better position later against John Nicholson, who played knight takes g5 and lost. It took me months to realise that black could meet 13 queen c2, so this queen c2 move. So knight c takes d5, bishop takes g5, queen c2, which hits actually c7 and e4. So John is saying basically in this position he could meet it with knight f6, and John was saying basically no computers were back then, and I wanted to find a tactic that would allow me to keep the knight on e4. So really in this position actually, I've done some analysis, and basically if white takes on c7 with the knight, then there's queen c8, so creating that pin, which is very useful. For example, say the unpinning move queen c3 to protect the queen, then he takes and knight e4, and black ends up better because, you know, look at this structural damage. It's dicing all the pawns. It doesn't matter about black being a pawn down here. Black's actually much better here. Okay, that's just one variation though. If queen takes c7, then just takes his winning a piece because that d5 knight's dropping off. So this is fine, it seems. After queen c2 to play knight f6. Okay, but the surprise move here, which wasn't sort of anticipated by Peter Wells, was actually to play h4. Now the small side effect that h4 has with it weakens actually the g3 square, and then that's a little bit of a joke, isn't it, to say that, to mention that. It's just being ultra pedantic. Or is it? Is it being ultra pedantic that it weakens the g3 square? You know, this bishop's driven back, you know, maybe white can use the g-file, surely, but where are actually the coordinated targets for attack of all these pieces? It's not really g7 at the moment, is it? Unless you envisage a knight h5, but that's not going to be possible, and a rook g1. So the coordinated targets of attack are not really here at the moment after h4. So the bishop actually slips back to h6. And here, Peter Wells finds another tactical target, namely this rook on a8. So he goes a bit into greed mode, into materialism mode, one of the 7 deadly sins according to Jonathan Rowson, which is a book I'm currently kind of reading. So knight takes f6, queen takes f6, so we see a bit of gobbly materialism now. This next move, queen e4. Okay. Now, remember what we said about h4, that g3 is slightly weak? Well, this is part of the punishment, part of the penalty for this gobbly materialism from the opponent. Bishop takes f4, allowing the queen to come all the way to snap up that rook on a8. Now, we see an interrupting move for that queen on this lovely diagonal, otherwise it will retreat back to defend the white king and also maybe to coordinate an attack, you know, against g7 at some point. So we see this interruption move, knight c6, and it's also attacking the queen, so the queen has to move, and now we get a tempo gain. Obviously we can finally exploit that g3, which was ultra pedantic a few moves ago to even think about h4 having a slight side effect, but bishop g3, and it's starting to spell extreme danger now for the white king. How does white actually defend f2? Look, the pieces are still inside the box. And the queen's over here. It's ridiculous. So black's got two heavy pieces pointing at the white king now. f4 is played. Okay, but queens are very dangerous, especially with delicate queen moves in the centre, as we've seen recently. So the queen just shifts to the right slightly, queen e6. So hitting in all directions. So on the e4 square, on h3, on, you know, maybe d5, maybe c4 as well is another check threatened. Okay, so white decides to try and defend and attack at the same time with rook g1. You know, potentially one day there's going to be an attack on g7, but he's loosened h3. So the weakness of the last move is that actually h3 is no longer protected. So queen h3 check, and now we see a king hunt. Queen h2 check, actually winning the rook. So black's doing fantastically now. Okay, if he takes on c6, well, he does, his king's going to be subject to more attack, and it's unfortunate his pieces are just inside the box still. So queen d1 check. Now if he goes to e4, then there's queen h1 check, nasty skewer on the diagonal. So he tries to evacuate to c4, but the damage is going to be done by a little guy soon. Queen c2 check, and after king b5, I hope you can spot the final move of the game. If I give you 5 seconds starting from now. Did you get it yet? Maybe another 5 seconds. Okay, 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, a6 check, just winning the queen because the king's not going to be protecting the queen. Okay, well done on that if you got that. So what a king hunt. But okay, it looks easy, but it was to do with, you know, a lot of dynamics in the position. You know, interrupting white from castling started to be the first kind of, you know, cause of issues for white. So white's not, you know, naturally making moves with his knights or his bishops or his rook, and he's artificially trying to justify the rook and trying to get an attack. But it looks, you know, black is outrageously setting up this target on d5, which can be used, you know, as a dual purpose. You know, g4, g5 will surely undermine the knight on f6 and undermine d5, and also allow white an attack on the g file. It all looks so good, but is it? Does it actually taste that good? No, because basically there's a lot of dynamics in this position. Black doesn't have to be forced into playing very passive moves to defend that d5. He can let d5 go because he can counter-attack on g5. And although visually it looks scary to give, you know, this g-file attack to the opponent, what are the concrete details of the position here going on after this knight e4? Well, there's several, in fact, because there's also c7, there's also this rook on this diagonal. There's a lot of tactical details and apparent vulnerabilities here to consider and factor in after knight c takes d5. But black has some dynamism on his side, and if we look, you know, these pieces were never never developed in this game, amusingly. Okay, so bishop takes g5, and white's using maybe his queen too much without, you know, continuing his developments. He's being a bit hyper aggressive with the queen, but maybe, you know, expecting a passive move from black, or an exchange, you know. But after queen c2, black is really, you know, asking, you know, white queen, okay, you want to do more, you want to win material, fine, win material, knight f6, win the rook on a8 if you really want it. First white plays h4 though to drive that bishop away, and then maybe rook g1, target g7, and now the queen goes into materialism mode, so it takes on f6, clearing away the diagonal, and now this move queen e4, which as we see is terribly punished now after bishop takes f4, queen takes a8, knight c6, so the queen's not really going to be defending the king anytime soon on the diagonal, and now we see bishop g3. So here white is in big trouble. So f4, queen e6, nice little shift to the right. So queen e4, queen h3 and queen c4, principal like checks being threatened. I think queen e4 it looks to be the most painful though, because you can imagine rook g1, queen f3 would be mate, because this bishop's stopping that exit point. So if we look in this position, it looks as though without white being able to, not having these pieces developed, bishop d2, queen e4 looks to be end of game, because it's simultaneously keeping an eye on that knight, keeping this queen out of the diagonal. So we can have some empathy for this move, rook g1, but it's obviously downhill now for white. I think this could be actually technically completely lost here. You can imagine also, in fact, let's have a look at king e2. I'm sorry, I should have put this in the main analysis, but let's have a look. Could white have tried to play king e2? Well, there's queen e4 given as the most powerful move. So say king d2, then just take the rook. Now, if the rook had moved here, say rook g1, I think there's I wonder if you can spot it. Yeah, there's another point about this. This queen is now tactically a vulnerability. Can you spot what black could play here? If I've given you that clue, if I give you 10 seconds here. Okay, just knight takes d4 check, using that pin, just winning the queen. That's the strongest move. But other moves are also winning, like bishop h2. Because here, say the rook moves. Then again there's knight takes d4, or even just rook e8 is dangerous, and this is dangerous if you don't want to win the queen. You just can end up winning the rook again. So it's all pretty dire and downhill here. So rook g1, this brilliant decoy and also white's lack of development spell total disaster. These three guys not really doing anything for white's king getting hunted down in this line. So king e4, queen h1. In this line, these pieces are just spectators, just watching white lose material now. So a6, end of game. So one of John's fond memories in the Nimzo Indian from 1981. I hope you enjoyed it and found it instructive in certain ways. Please leave any comments or questions on YouTube. John says, in memory, I've always been rather proud of this game, but it was probably just a rout. Rivka might say something else, but it is photogenic, and Angus Dunnington included it in a book on the Nimzo Indian as an entertaining game. Best wishes, John.